Florian, can we share the screen for the recording to get the nice screen? Ah, here we go.
Awesome. All right. Just for everyone's FYI, this is going to be a pretty interactive presentation. I have the PowerPoint slides. Let me mute myself. I do have the PowerPoint slides available and also a repository on GitHub where you can view all of this. It'll be on one of the slides. I have a double echo going on. Does everyone else hear? Oh, that's nice.
There is a slight echo.
Yeah, that's for my laptop. So I'm in the meeting from my laptop, and yeah. All right. All right. Everyone sees the slides just fine. So today I'm going to be doing a talk about building APIs everyone loves with Fast API. It's been Python's fastest growing framework over the past 5 years. Came out in December 2018. So a little bit about me. All right. Jonathan Baldera. I'm a software engineer at StriveWorks. I'm a member of the engagements team, so I'm always building rapid applications for our customers. Do we have any former military veterans or current reserves? There you go. Yep. I just got out the Army about a year ago. I was in the Army for 8 years as a systems engineer. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Baldera. Apologies, there seems to be a slight lag.
Ask a question. How many people have used Fast API before? I've used Fast. Everyone? We got 3 hands in this whole room. Wow. Do you guys even code in Python? I'm kidding. But
so on this side, we can see how Fast API compares to Django and Flask, the other 2 big frameworks within the Python community. Fast API was only released in December of 2018, and it already has 53,000 GitHub stars as compared to Flask that released in 2010 with 61,000, and Django was 68, but Django was released in 2005. So we can see that it's growing really fast. Even developers love Fast API. According to Stack Overflow's 2022 survey, Fast API is one of the favorite backend frameworks. This is just a list of all frameworks. So you have React in here, which is a front-end framework. But Fast API is sitting at about 68% of developers loving it, compared to Django sitting at 53% and Flask at 48% of developers loving to work with it. So what is Fast API? So Fast API is a modern web framework that works with Python 3.7 and above, based on the addition of Python's type hints, automatic data model documentation with JSON schema or Open API. It's built with the idea of auto completion everywhere that you code. So I think this is one of the reasons that developers really love it. We hate forgetting methods that we have available to us, and it's always nice when our code editor gives us that. And it's also very fast to develop with. So Fast API's performance. Fast API has out-of-the-box support for concurrency. Fast API is built on Starlet, a micro framework, which is built on Unicorn, an asynchronous server gateway interface. So it has support for asynchronous code. And so it performs really fast. So how fast can you develop a Fast API? Well, you can build a trivial application in just 5 lines of code. And you have 2 versions of documentation. for that code straight out of the gate. I'm going to demonstrate this with some of my examples. So right here is example 1. As you can see, we have a Fast API application running. We import Fast API, and we can set up an endpoint here with an HTTP method, our GET, and we establish our URL, and then we provide our logic. What do we want to return when we implement this, when this function gets called? Let me zoom in for everyone. So here, based off of that application, we already have some docs that's available to us, right? So we have this root, it's our main endpoint when we use this application, but we can already see we're getting started on the right foot by documenting our API. Not only that, if I go to this endpoint redoc, we have another version of the documentation, just so you can use whatever documentation you prefer, or your front-end developers will love you for having documentation. So enforcing good code through types. So type hints allow our code editors to provide auto-completion. This saves developers times, accessing those properties or methods that are available to us whenever we use our objects. Type hints also works with as documentation for developers. It lets developers know what you expect to get input and output as the result of our functions, right? So when developers are getting familiar with a code base, it's nice to see that, hey, this function is expecting a string and it's gonna output this object for me. You also get data conversion and linter errors exposed to you. So Fast API will use these type hints within our functions to convert the data that it's receiving in. And then, as I mentioned, type hints help us. Type hints will help us alongside a powerful linter like MyPy to help us catch errors before runtime. So going into our next example, I'll show you guys how MyPy is screaming at me already because I'm trying to divide a string and a number, which is not allowed. Building out multiple endpoints with Fast API. So one thing that I will show you guys in the next example is when there is a value that is provided within our decorator and our function, it'll be part of our path parameters. If it's of a singular type, such as an int, a string, a boolean, right, a simple data type, and it's only a part of our function, it's going to be a query parameter. So Fast API is able to quickly disseminate, hey, this is going to be a path parameter or query parameter based on how you use it within your decorator and function. So here we are. We're going to go to one example 2 of the code. So we have here 4 API endpoints implemented. These are all GET requests. So as you can see in this first function, we have a path parameter of num. However, we're not providing any type hints within our function. In this second one, we are also getting a hint because we are going to be providing the num. We're actually going to assign it to an integer. So what's going to happen is if I go into our docs for the second one, since the first one does not have a type hint, it's going to automatically assume that it's a string. So even though I want to pass in a number, I can pass in any string and I'll just get that string back. And if I do pass in a number, it's going to automatically convert that into a string. As you can see, this is the result, a string of 3 in our response body, whenever we call that. However, once I provided it a type hint, my docs won't just let me input a string, right? I'm not allowed to do that because it's not expected. And once I provide a number, the number 4, it's not within parentheses, it's not within quotes. So I am actually getting the integer 4 back. And if you try to if you actually hit this endpoint, right? So if I hit hint and I pass it a string, Fast API is going to return this nice error telling me, hey, this number value that you passed in was supposed to be a string. Was supposed to be an integer, not a string. So I'll go back into the code, and as you can see, for this next example, I'm using query parameters. The number and string that is passed into my function is not a part of my path decorator. So this is how you would implement a query parameter. And on this first one, I don't have any type hints. On this second one, I do have type hints. So when I type in a dot on this string, I don't have the methods that I would expect to be able to utilize when I have the string, right? I would actually have to like type out lower instead of forgetting if it's, maybe I work on JavaScript and I'm typing 2 lowercase, right? Because I'm forgetting. But because I provided it that type hint, I'm able to, start letting my editor help me as I start coding and make sure that I don't have any typos and such. Also, because I am trying to divide a string and a number using a linter such as MyPy, my editor is going to scream at me, letting me know that I cannot divide a string with the number. So complex types and data validation with Pydantic. So Fast API relies on Pydantic to perform type validation on requests. Any value that's declared as a type of Pydantic model, which it will know by inheriting that base model from Pydantic, will be interpreted as part of the request body of the request getting received from that API. Pydantic models also allow Fast API to control the data responses by using the response model parameter in our decorator functions. Well, in our decorators. So I'm going to showcase that. So moving on to example 3. So for example 3, I've implemented a user API endpoint. So I have this user base class that's based off of inheriting the Pydantic base model. We have this user. We expect a username, an email, and a name associated with this user. When I have this other class, which is user in, I'm inheriting all of these properties from the user base. In this user in, we expect the user, hey, when you're creating an account, we want the password. When we expose our user, if someone wants to make a get and receive the user data, we're only going to expose everything within this user base that we're inheriting and this ID that we assign to the user once they've created an account. And then within our actual database, we have the hashed password for this user. Caveat, I implemented this hash password. It is not the best practice. I value simplicity for this example. So we have this first endpoint. We're just going to get all the user data. I'll showcase that. So I'll use my awesome documentation that Fast API provided for me. And I'm going to get this user data. Within this user, I'll let that pass by. So within this this database, right, which is actually just a text file that I created, we have all of these users. And because I use this GET request and I have this response model with the list of users in the database, I'm going to get all the information from the database because it's going to provide me all the information that's allowed within this Pydantic model of user in DB. However, when I create that user, right, when I use that post request to create that user, I'm only going to expose that. I want that user out, right? I'm going to respond with the user out because I'm going to create an ID for that user. But when I get that request in, I'm going to use a user in, right? I only want when my user creates a user account, I'm only expecting them to provide me with a username, an email, a name, and a password. So going into our docs, I'm going to make this post request to create another user. So we have a username string, email user@example.com, name string, and just a string password. So that was accepted. I got the response back of the user. And now, since I have that ID, I'll just do a GET request on that user, 11. And I got an internal server error. All right, I got the ID back. I got the user back. So I got the user back, but however, I'm not getting the hashed password that I did create once I posted that user. And that's all because of this response model, user out. So, we don't want to expose the user's password, whether it's hashed or not. So malicious users can't unhash it and then steal people's credentials. So that's ability that Fast API allows us to do. So why auto documentation is a big deal? I'll let you guys look at some of these memes and hopefully laugh. Before I spam you guys with words. So why auto documentation is a big deal? Business requirements incentivize developers to continue working on features, right? I haven't really met a product manager yet that is like, hey, I really want you to write these API documentation. It's more of like, hey, I want you to implement feature X or Y. Documentation is usually dropping in priority of work. It's very easy to just be like, hey, I'll write the docs later. And then you forget and it never happens. Writing documentation is hard, right? Developers have to write documentation. They just built this beautiful API. They know all about this API, and then they got to explain it to someone who did not build it, doesn't know how to use it, and is scratching their head, right? So, they're having to write that documentation with all that context to people that don't know what the API is for or how to use it. Maintaining documentation sucks. Let's be real, right? You're working on a team, people are editing all these API endpoints, and no one's updating the documentation. It gets stale, old, and then no one wants to touch it. Looking at you, React, we still have class components for the JavaScript people on your documentation. And then I found this comment on Reddit, right? As I was doing research, being distracted. Programmers don't like documentation because it violates the instinct of every experienced developer has to avoid duplication, right? We just do not like doing the same things multiple times. Developers, we're lazy. We love to do things fast and efficient. So after we implement an API, we don't want to write it into English, right?
Documentation is only duplicating what's already there in the code. You're probably
agreed, right?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, there was a comment from a person. He said, if you're duplicating everything in the documentation from what your code is, you're probably doing documentation wrong. Did I capture the spirit? So enhancing documentation. With Fast API, we can further customize our documentation to provide additional information to the end users of our application. We can use tags to group related endpoints to make it easier for our consumers to find the endpoints that they need and how to and find ways to consume our API. And then we can also rename our documentation URL or set it to none if we want to hide that documentation. You know, maybe for security purposes, you really want to hide this documentation and not expose it to users. You have the option to do that with the primary and the secondary documentation options. So here I've created another API. As you can see, this documentation is based for the Austin Python Meetup. We're going to give special thanks to our organizers, Amicus, Black Lucas, and Striveworks for giving me the time to work on this. I can add this time of service, you know, who to contact for this API, you know, the licensing information, and all of these are grouped by tags, right? If it doesn't have a tag, it'll fall under this default. And here's the code that I did to do that. Right? In that fast API class that I import, I can put all of this information about the docs, rename the URL, hide the secondary docs if I want to, add versioning, add a terms of service, I heart MLOps, right? The contact information, all this license info, and we can keep it all in one place that's super easy for everyone to see. And then, you know, we group our API endpoints by using these tags, right? So all these user tags that are related, Fast API, I'll put them right here so that we can see all of our endpoints related. Once you build a backend that's very large, it's very nice to have all these tags so that you can easily filter out all of the abilities that you have. And you can add additional information here to further describe those tags and such description.
A good question.
Yeah.
If you put a doc string on one of those endpoints, does that show up in the documentation? I think it shows up under the.
No, so you would access it through the endpoint, right? So for this one, I renamed the docs URL to Austin. But it doesn't show up in the documentation anywhere that it's been changed to Austin. You wouldn't be able to reach the documentation if you don't know that. Yeah.
We're just kind of piggybacking on that. So like, if the actual if you have like a function doc string that like describes like what the method's doing, like right underneath the function name, does that show up in the UI?
Great point. Yes, it will show up in the UI. So I'll put in a doc string. This is the root. Right. I have hot refresh. Let me make sure I save that. When I open this up, it'll appear right. It should appear right here. This is the root. So you can also add that documentation to your functions, just so that it's everywhere, right? Makes it a lot easier to maintain. Some things that I probably missed going over this is in the documentation, right? It'll also tell you like, hey, trying to find it. Give me 1 second. Hey, this is a path parameter, right? It'll tell you here. It'll tell you what type it's expecting. So all of your parameters will also be documented based off of your type hints and what you write in your functions. So why does everyone love Fast API? Businesses love it because developers are able to provide value quicker, right? We're able to develop and have less bugs that we're not catching before runtime. Newer, higher developers can also learn Fast API pretty quickly as it's a little bit minimal. So they can deliver value really fast. Backend developers love it because we hate writing documentation. Or we suck at it, right? There's millions of excuses over why there's not proper documentation for an application. It does a lot of the auto documentation for us, which is awesome. And front-end developers love it because there's no more need of your front-end developers being like, hey, what's that URL? What parameters can I pass into this? What path parameters? What are my query parameters that I can pass into this endpoint? Hey, I can't find this endpoint anymore. It's like, hey, I have the documentation as I continue to edit this, and we merged things into main. Documentations will be updated, so you can see all the information about the API you're trying to consume. So thanks everyone for listening to me ramble about Fast API. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks to all of our sponsors and the organizers for here. Also thanks to Striveworks for letting me put this together. If you're interested in a career in ML Ops, please check us out. I have stickers and tattoos in the back. Also, all of this information is on GitHub, and I made a tiny URL link so that you can access these PowerPoints in this bottom right corner. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Are there any questions?
If you're writing a front end in Python, will it automatically give you Oh, if you're writing a front end in Python, will it automatically give you kind of a Python classes that call that back end?
No. Okay. So yeah, can you elaborate a little bit?
Oh, so say you've got a import client. You say client.user.create, and then it'll basically create you an object that's a Python object, but it'll call that backend and call that for you. Or like you might say a user.get, and it would get an object, Python object local, but it's going to call that backend to get that for you.
Yeah, you can generate clients with Fast API so that you can call the backend. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, there's usually a lot of times you have a Python class or library that's kind of that wrapper around your HTTP request. So.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. As long as you can reach the server, you can 100% use it. So if you want to use, you want to make a request to it, it's supported. Any type of request.
Thank you.
So Fast API uses Open API, which is a standard, and there's client library generators for Open API.
He said it exactly right. There's a Python Open API code generator, so you can actually point to the Open API part of Fast API, and it'll take your Fast API code, turn it into JSON, and then the generator reads that JSON and generates native Python code. That's all type safe and everything.
The docs also include the curl command for trying things out.
Hey, just quickly ask you about authentication. So there's a lot of endpoints. It was a great presentation, but I noticed there was user delete and stuff like that. You clearly don't want to just expose that. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you have any pointers?
Yeah, I mean, it's always great to have more models, pedantic models, than you need, right? So, generate a base model that has the information that you expect to be on most of your classes related to that data, and then build models so that you can filter the traffic that's going in between, right? You can't control right, someone using HTTPS so that you can have a secure communication, but also, you want to also use models to protect what's coming in, right? So that Fast API can filter out stuff, and that also can filter out responses, right? So you want to filter those requests and responses. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, just a follow-up question. Does that mean JWT or something? You just don't bother with that? There's no login.
No, you still wanted to use.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you that's what I meant to ask. Could you expand a little bit on authentication? Like, how would you do it if you were actually going to use authentication? Or maybe just tell me how to do it, because I'm not suggesting you code it up right now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some recommended ways to implement authentication with the docs. I'll defer to that because I don't want to give bad advice when it comes to authentication.
I can speak to it actually. Yeah, we can help. Briefly, I don't want to jump in here, but because I use Fast API actually in my work and I love it, which is part of the reason why I came to this talk. But anyway, yeah, there you can have like API keys and so forth, and it'll actually render on the docs as well, and which is really convenient. And you can use that for like authentication on certain endpoints. And but it's nice that it also becomes a part of the documentation, and you can like click a button and then like put in like the API key and so forth. So the actual documentation for Fast API itself, as I'm sure you've seen, is really, really good. The guy who made it is like really thorough. And so, yeah, there's some really great stuff out there. I'll stop.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Any in the chat? Oh, something in the chat, or it's just you type?
Yeah. The guy who made this is a total genius. You guys should definitely follow him. He also made this thing called SQL model. Have you tried this? So it like pulls the tables from your database and auto generates Pydantic. So like imagine you have a table called user and you want to just take users from your SQL table and just send it, to the client. You can use this thing called SQL model. It's like magic. This guy, like, yeah, check this guy's repositories out. Like Fast API is under a guy. It's not like the Fast API org or something. It's like one guy. And like check out his other repositories. He's like total savant.
Yeah, Sebastian Ramirez. It's all under Tiangelo. Is his GitHub name. SQL model is his library. So like, what SQL model is doing is it's built on top of SQL Alchemy, and so a lot of times when you're using SQL Alchemy and Pydantic, you have to create your classes in SQL Alchemy, and then you have to create it in Pydantic. So he's trying to solve that problem by just duplicating that. He also has other frameworks. So there's a CLI framework that he has, Typer, which looks very similar to Fast API. So if you're tired of using argparse, check out Typer. It looks very similar to Fast API.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw a comment in there that like Fast API is great, especially if you're like just beginning with Python. It's so easy to get started and have a public facing API, a REST API out there. Really easy to show other people that like, yo, I have code that works, and you could just go on, host it on Heroku or Google Cloud. Pretty simple. And it's really great. It's like easier than Flask. You don't have to worry about the whole front end stuff. You can just do a very quick turn whatever function you have right into REST API. I actually do have a question on that. Do you know if Fast API does anything else besides REST APIs? Do they have an RPC library yet, or do they have a GraphQL or anything?
They do. You are allowed to
Really?
use GraphQL, and they also support WebSockets as well.
Yes, they do.
So,
WebSockets. Okay, awesome.
Yep, they use their documentation recommends Strawberry for GraphQL. It's a Python library integrated for GraphQL. I'm not sure about RPC. I mean, you can probably write bad code to implement that, but I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen that yet.
Awesome. Thank you. It's about 9 o'clock, so any last questions? Once, twice, 3 times sold? All right, well.
Whoa. Don't run away.
Take it over, Jason.
I have a question for you. And this is, you say why experienced people have Fast API, but experienced people just can switch between libraries very quickly. I'm trying to figure out how much time do you think, and this is not an absolute, it's like give an estimate of how much time a total beginner can learn to do something very simple in Fast API, and then talk about experts a little bit. I'm trying to see the learning curve for this, so give some ideas.
I would say probably a beginner can read into documentation and watch some tutorials a couple of days. I think it's very, very easy and simple to use. You know, once you start understanding your basic operations, right? We got a total beginner. You know, you start understanding your CRUD operations, right? You have your get, post, put or patch, and delete. You start understanding what those things do. That's probably half the problem right there. And then, you know, you Fast API does a lot of the legwork for you in figuring out the path, query, and what should go in the request body. So yeah, I would say within a week. I think the bigger learning curve will probably come from like trying to learn an ORM, such as like SQL Alchemy and, you know, manipulating a database. But the Fast API part, I think that comes relatively quickly.
So in short, for beginners, very quick, you can come up with a simple web page using Fast API.
It's not meant for a web page, so you'll have the docs, and you'll have to create a front end that utilizes the API. But yeah, I would say the Fast API part is fast. You know, picking up some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript might take a little bit longer. But creating an API that someone can use, I think, could be really implemented pretty quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
So you briefly mentioned.
Hello?
You briefly touched on error handling, but what does it do in general for unexpected sorts of requests? API generated with Fast API.
So handling errors, how do we handle errors with Fast API? Is that more of your question?
Errors or unexpected requests in general.
Yeah, so with error handling, we have this, so there's HTTP exceptions that we can raise. And with that, right, if we're getting, right, if we know that some types of errors could come up, we can raise these HTTP exceptions. And as part of that, we can provide like, hey, this is the status code, whether it's like a 404 not found, or, you know, 500 internal server error. And we can add, I believe it's, details to better explain the errors to the users as to why this error might be happening or what occurred on the back end.
How much of that happens automatically if we don't specify it?
Not much, right? If you don't specify, you'll probably hit an internal server error 500, and you would have to see the running Fast API application to see what actually happened. So if you're the client and you run into an unexpected error, you're not going to get much. If you're the developer and you have access to the server running it, you'll see the Python error that caused the issue.
So it's 404 or 500 or bust by default.
You can put any status code here, and you can provide as much detail. But yeah, if you don't have this implemented, you're most likely going to hit 500. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate all your time.
Nice demo. Thank you.